Good morning, everyone. I will now call the State 911 Advisory Board meeting into order. Paul, please take the roll.
Chief Scott Howland.
Present.
Charles Burdan.
Present.
Chief John Peters.
Present.
Chief Craig Carter.
Present.
Chief Corey Hornia. Sheriff James Maley. Chris Herron. Michael Miller. Charles Cullen.
Present.
Paul Truxell.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Very good. On to item number 2, approval of the minutes. Are there any corrections? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Paul, please take the votes.
Okay. Chief Scott Howland.
Yes.
Charles Burdan.
Aye.
Chief John Peters.
Aye.
Chief Craig Carter.
Aye.
Sheriff Corey Hornia.
Aye.
Sheriff James Maley. Oh, absent. Chris Herron. Michael Miller.
Aye.
Charles Cullen.
Aye.
Paul Truxell.
Aye.
Okay, at this point, we will be going into closed session to consider possible and pending litigation, personnel matters, and 911 outage information. And we will be reporting back on the anything relevant to that meeting. So we'll now go into closed session.
Please grab binders and we're going to go back. Well, yeah, you can go.
Okay, we'll call the meeting back into order. It's 9:26. Regarding the closed session, there was nothing to report out and no action was taken. On to agenda item number 4, which is a legislative update by our Chief Legislative Analyst, Reggie Salvador.
Good morning, folks. Just keeping this short, not that much going on in regards to 911 specific bills other than SB 566 McGuire, which is the requires telecoms to notify OES within 60 minutes of rural outage, the estimated time to repair an outage and when service is restored. This also makes Cal OES responsible for notifying any applicable county OES and sheriff of any county affected by the outage. This bill was held by the Senate, and it did not pass the first policy committee, which means it's now turned into a 2-year bill, so there's continuing discussion that will go on through both this as well as next year's legislative session. So other than that, are there any other questions?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
On to item number 5, a FirstNet update. As was previously reported to you, we did release a request for information latter part of last year. We did receive a number of responses which were evaluated. And one of the recommendations from the California board was that the state move forward with preparing a RFP, request for proposal template, which is currently in process. It has not yet been completed. We were invited to attend a FirstNet meeting in Dallas, Texas, back on June the 6th or 7th and 8th, actually. It was called one of their Spock Fest, which is State Points of Contact, in which FirstNet and AT&T provided an update on their process as well as a dive into the secure portal, which allows some more detailed granular information on the AT&T proposal and coverage and cost, et cetera. That information is being shared through a number of outreach meetings. On June the 22nd, we did hold a CalFIRN Board Directors meeting and provided them an update, and AT&T and actually FirstNet did a short presentation on the public portal, which is at firstnet.com. If you go to firstnet.com, it will provide the public portal, which is a lot of information about what FirstNet's about, what AT&T is doing, as well as some high-level coverage predictions. The secure side dives a little bit deeper into the state plan, as well as some of the cost. As of day before yesterday, AT&T did advise that they will be updating the firstnet.com presentation to include some of the cost information. As part of our outreach effort, we've received the draft state plan on June 19th. We have 45 days to review that and provide responses or provide comments back to AT&T and FirstNet. And then they will take the next 45 days or so to incorporate those comments and address those issues with the forecast release of the final state plan the latter part of September. That will trigger the 90-day governor's decision. So the FirstNet, or the CalFIRN Board, will be looking at that finalized state plan and making a recommendation, which will go through the director of Cal OES and then on into the governor's office. So we have a number of sessions, 10 at this point, and actually the list is growing because we're receiving requests from organizations to hold additional outreach meetings. So we held our first one this past Monday in Fresno. We have another one this afternoon. If you're interested, please stick around. It starts at 1 o'clock here in this room. We have one in Dublin. Actually, there's going to be two in Dublin. I believe the first one is June 19th or 29th, and then there's one later on in July. We have one in Palo Alto on July the 6th, in Van Nuys, Southern California on the 7th, Los Alamitos, La Jolla, also on the 7th. The Ontario is actually an Ontario area meeting. That will be on July the 12th, and that actually is in Rancho Cucamonga, which is just adjacent to Ontario. We have another session in Reading on the 20th, and we're working with Cal OES's tribal advisory group to schedule an additional meeting which will address the tribal concerns. Are there any questions regarding the FirstNet update? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 6. So this is a request that was previously done with a meeting presentation regarding call data reports. There was some conversation amongst the board about removing this as a standing item, and so a vote is required to remove this as a standing item. So we'll entertain a motion to approve the removal of this as a standing report.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Chief Scott Howland,
Aye.
Charles Burdan,
Aye.
Chief John Peters,
Aye.
Chief Greg Carter,
Aye.
Sheriff Corey Honea, Sheriff James Maley, Chris Herron, Michael Miller,
Aye.
Charles Cullen,
Aye.
and Paul Truxell.
Aye.
Motion carries. On to item number 7. At your last meeting, it was requested that an overview presentation on the 911 Setna fund be presented. So we're going to call upon Butch Courier to provide that presentation.
whatever the beginning did. Yeah, just click the first one.
This one's touchy.
All right, so those of you on this side, we're sorry, but it's going to be up here. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is give you an overview really from legacy 911 or where we are today in 911, all the way through the funding mechanism and all the way into next gen. And we're going to do that in 20 minutes. So if you have questions, please, the intent is to make sure you get a good overview, so please ask me questions as we go along. So this is what we're going to cover, an overview of the 911 system. I'm going to talk about CETNA and the revenue and expenditures portion of it, and then get a little bit into next gen. So I'm going to trace a call through our current 911 system using a basic map. And then once we get an understanding of each of the components in there, I'm going to tie that network back to the CETNA funding and show you how each of those map to each portion of our network and show you the percentages of our average, about $102 million a year, which is what we spend on the 911 network, and how those map to each of those major expenditures. And then we're going to discuss next gen a little bit and some of the changes that are coming down the way. So this is just a quick snapshot for 2016. We had about 28.5 million calls. About 80% of those are wireless. The other interesting thing to note on this slide is there were about 5,000 text messages. So if you look at overall percentages, that's a very, very low percentage. So if you're hearing any chatter out there in the PSAP community about concerns of text to 911, we are not seeing it overrun any call center now. It's usually a really small percentage of their overall call volume. So this is a basic architecture. So up in the upper left corner there, you see it says landline. That's an old telephone, or just a plain old telephone. And that would come in, when you make your 911 call, that's going to come into an end office switch, some switching center that's processing that call. That call then goes to what we call a selective router. Those are state-of-the-art technology in about 1978. So that's the decision maker in the system. And so what it's going to happen at this point is we're going to go down to this, what we call the automatic location information database. And that's going to tell us where do we route that call? What PSAP does that telephone call go to? So it takes that information, sends it back to the selective router. The selective router now knows where to send that call, and we send it to the PSAP. We still don't know where you are, though. We just know the right PSAP to send the call to. So now we need to go back to this database and figure out where you are. So we go back to the database then looks up where you are, we send that information back to the PSAP, and now we know where you're at. This typically happens in about 3 to 5 seconds, but there can be other challenges in the network where it slows that down. So this system was in place for a number of years, I don't know what, mid-90s, cell phones came around. And so what they did was they just put cell phone switching right on top of this. So what happens, it follows essentially the same path. But when you make a 911 call, we go to this MSC, or Mobile Switching Center, and that interfaces with this database. And in that database is a pseudo record, because we don't know where your mobile telephone is. We have no idea. So what we do is we populate that pseudo record based on information from the tower to figure out where you are. Comes back to the selective router. We go down, figure out where to send it to the PSAP. The PSAP does the location information, and now we know where you're at. So that was working great. Along came VoIP. So we put that into the same, essentially the same network. It follows a similar path to what wireless does. If that wasn't enough, we thought text to 911 was a good idea. Most of those solutions are over the top, going through an internet solution that goes right into the PSAP. So that's, a couple of minutes overview on our current 911 network. So any questions before we go on? Because we're going to use this diagram again and again to tie back to our expenditures and how we break things out within the 911 system for the state of California. So from there, just a little summary. It's based on 1970s technology. That's what we're working on today. It supports voice and limited data. The infrastructure is well beyond end of life, and it certainly doesn't meet the current needs of our technology. There's a lot of limitations with this technology. So, like the picture there, very reliable, very dependable, does a lot of good work, but it's dated. So now from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about the CETNA fee structure. So CETNA is the State Emergency Telephone Numbering Account. It was established in the 70s, about the same time as all this technology was coming into place. We collect revenue on a percentage of the intrastate calls. So those are the calls that are made from California to California, intrastate, within the state. So when this system was first designed, it made a lot of sense. Remember the long distance numbers and being able, it was very easy to track. However, interstate call revenue is declining, and I'm going to talk about that. It's primarily due because the revenue associated with your wireless bill, most of that revenue goes toward data, not voice. And we're only collecting the fee on the voice portion. So that's primarily why this is declining. So this chart shows the status of the interstate revenue and what's happened over the years. So you see we are about a 6% drop every year from year to year. Until last year, well, 2015, we had a 9.6% drop. This most recent year, we only saw about a 1% drop, right? So it's still declining. So the one to look at is the purple line at the top, which is total revenue. So our total revenue is continuing to decline. It's not going down as fast as it was, but we are still in a declining mode, and that's a problem. Yes?
I'm assuming that the numbers have an extra 3 zeros?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
As we're not pulling in billions.
Oh, no. This is billions of revenue, and then we take a percentage of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
It
So remember,
is
this is total revenue coming in as reported by the CPUC, and then we get a percentage of that that's allocated to CETNA, the 0.75, or 0.75%. So this graph you've seen pretty much every advisory board for a long time. So the portion that's in orange is based on projections. Everything to the left of that is actual expenditures and revenue. And so you can see really the green line is the total of what we have coming in as far as expenditures, plus what we have in the rainy day fund, as you'd call it. So when that line dips below our expenditures, that's when we've got a problem. We're predicting that'll happen sometime 2018, 2019. There's a lot of factors that go into that, so finding an exact date of when that happens is challenging, but we think this is pretty accurate. So our expenditures average about $102 million a year. They cover the database, the network, and the call answering equipment that's located at all the PSAPs. So we're going to get a little overview of how those are broken up and where they're distributed in the system. So if we go back to this basic architecture, those major categories that I just showed you, if I overlay them on top, what you see, if it's in pink, it's a tariff. If it's in that yellow color, the PSAP, that's our CPE contract. The light blue is, for the most part, CalNet is where those contracts come from. And then there's some other fees in there. So what we're going to do is walk through each of these major categories at a high level and show you the breakdown of them and how we in the 911 branch work through these numbers each year. So we'll start with this chart, which gives you kind of a high-level overview. The percentage column is the percentage of the overall expenditure that's dedicated to that major component. And then we've got the dollar amounts mixed in here, all right? So you can kind of see that. And that's in your handouts, and you can see that readily. So if we go back to this 911 architecture and we start to work through it and we match the expenditures to the part of the network, the first one we'll start with is the ALI database. It's about 31% of the overall funding. So that database includes the maintenance of the database, which is that big yellow circle on the left part of the slide there. There's primarily 2 carriers that are managing that for us, AT&T and Frontier. And then in addition to that, in the center, all of the local exchange carriers, the ILECs, and smaller companies there, they also maintain this same type of record for any phone numbers that they are responsible for. And then we have the county coordinators that are doing updates and feeding them back into the process as addresses change and things change. And this is all on the wireline portion. Because remember, for your wireless calls, it's a pseudo record that we have in there, so it doesn't really apply to this. So this is just for the wireline calls. This is all set up based on a tariff. The tariffs are established with the carriers working with the CPUC. They follow this manual. It's about 1.5 inches thick on the guidelines. They submit those into the CPUC following those procedures, and the tariff is established. Competitive pricing is not part of that process, interestingly enough. And the 911 branch is not part of that either. Once the tariff is established, we receive the tariff, and then we make sure when we receive the bills from these various carriers that they're following the tariff, but we're not involved in establishing it.
Butch, quick question. Because wireline phones are declining, has the cost of maintaining this database gone down over the last few years with the amount of people that are now using wireless phones exclusively and not using a wireline phone?
No, we have not seen a decline, other than some efforts we've taken internally to scrub the database and do some other efforts. No, we have not seen this cost dramatically decrease. So the next portion is the call answering equipment, or the customer premise equipment that's at the PSAPs. It accounts for about 30% of the SETNA fund. So I'm going to show you a graphic here. This is the process we go through, our funding process. We have a whole chapter in our operations manual. This is very busy. I put this up here just so you can see. We do have a process in place. And we have our PSAP advisors that walk the PSAPs through this. So the takeaways are, it's a well-defined process. It's a variable cost because it depends on which PSAPs are replacing their equipment in that year. Replacement cycles are about 5 to 7 years, and we don't pay any maintenance costs past year 7, which helps keep things current. We found that when a PSAP has to pay for their own maintenance, they're much more inclined to replace their equipment. Reimbursements are based on call volume. We have the metrics established. And it's important to understand that the call answering equipment is typically about 20% or less of the total cost in the PSAP. All the other costs are on the PSAP. So that would be the cost that they have for computer-aided dispatch, or the radio console, or the records management system, personnel costs, all those things are on the PSAP. We're just focused on the call answering portion. So that's about 30%. So the next piece is the 911 network and services and tariff process. And so all those areas you see in pink are associated with those various costs. They account for about 17% of the SETNA fund, and includes end-office trunks, some alley network services, alternate answer, and tandem-to-tandem circuits are all included in those pink areas that I've shown. The next piece is the 911 network and next-gen 911 projects. So this accounts for about 8% of SETNA. So these are all the T1s and the MPLS circuits, or the IP connections that we have in place for call handling of systems. Next-gen 911 ESI nets that we're building out is part of this right now. And AT&T Alley Network is reimbursed off of this CalNet contract. So up till now, we've already accounted for about 85% of the total costs each year for SETNA. The next piece is the wireless Alley database. So this is that database that's maintaining that pseudo record that gets updated when you make a 911 call from a mobile device. It's about 3% of SETNA. And these are the wireless database lookups that we pay to AT&T and Frontier to reconcile those 911 calls. So now we're up to about 88% of SETNA. The last piece is some other PSAP contracts that we have out there, like foreign language, text to 911, and anything we use for CMAS, other goods and services that are not on other contracts. It's about 2% of SETNA that's accounted for in this. So that's about 91% of the SETNA funds. So the remaining funds are broke out to some state agencies that have some expenditures that come out of the SETNA fund. So you'll see the 911 branch, that's our we're about 2.6%. BOE takes some to manage all the funds and all that. And Fiscal, which is our upcoming system for the state, is taking a small portion as well. So on average, we have about 102 million each year that we have in setting expenditures. Remember, this number goes up and down depending on which agencies are replacing CPE. And I'm going to get into some other slides that show some projections moving forward and what that number looks like.
Budge, I have a quick question on the CAL FIRE expenses. My understanding is that is for their CAD program. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so if the Set Enough Fund is not funding CAD programs throughout other PSAPs, why would it be funding the CAL FIRE CAD?
That's a very good question. Do you want me to answer that one, Pat, or do you want to answer it?
This is a direction that we've received from the governor's office and the Department of Finance. And we have brought it to their attention that that is troublesome. And at least in the current fiscal climate, the decision by them was to stay the course.
For the chief, this has been a topic that's come up. I turned it on, Paul, it's not working. How about
Just one for the newer board members, this is a topic that's come up probably, Charlie, for 8 years. Yeah, I mean, so anyway, kind of the same. We've brought up the same point and the response has been the same.
I have a question. So is the prohibition against using those funds to purchase CAD for agencies other than CAL FIRE based in regulation or statute or policy?
There is a FCC policy on this that directs that it be used only for the 911 system, not for other purposes. That issue has been, and that point has been escalated, but with no change of direction.
So
There's also a California government code that the way the Set in a Fund is written, that it's supposed to be to 911 call answering only. And so I can get you the government code section
there's
if
a
you want to read
government
it.
code section that mandates
For California code, yes.
and that, is there an exemption for CAL FIRE in there?
No, sir.
Thank you.
Can this body do anything to send a message? Is there any direction that we could give?
I believe that message has been sent numerous times, but the direction that we are under is that we will stay the course.
So this on this slide, that piece, all these other state agency expenditures, they are removed before the funds are even passed off to the 911 branch. So just if that helps you with the process. So we're not approving or disapproving, or we don't even see these funds that are allocated to the other state agencies.
I guess my point would be that if we're going to be not have the funding to do what we need to do for the basics of this program, and yet we're still funding that, that should be of concern to everybody. And,
Agreed.
I think maybe a point needs to be made again.
Yeah, agreed. So this slide is just an overview. I'm not going to read. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
Just to clarify, would it be in the best interest of the professional groups that we represent, maybe to go back to those leadership group, that leadership and the membership, to see if we can get some sort of support from them to try to change this?
I can tell you as a member of the Cal Chiefs, and myself and Chief Carter had this conversation with the Cal Chiefs leadership, and this is and has been a concern. Whereas, as the sheriff pointed out, I mean, there is a government code that stipulates you should not be doing this, and yet the state is. So we do have a concern about it, and we would like to have a resolution to it, especially given the fact that in financial times that we're in and we're facing within the next year, this fund is going to be at critical levels to provide the basic 911 services.
I think the focus is going to be revamping the whole thing, and hopefully in that process, all of this will be corrected. It would be the goal, to take on the bigger fight of revamping the entire way the fund is currently collected, including the tariffs and things of that nature. That's really the focus right now for us. And in that process, hopefully everything else will get cleaned up as well.
All right, so this is just a summary of some cost-saving activities we've done. Really, the takeaway here is we're looking for everything we can to save money so that we can do the things that are important for 911. And my team has been working really hard on these for a number of years, and we're continuing to look for ways to save money out of the Setna fund. So this is a summary of the fund condition statement that you usually get each and every meeting that I present to you. So what I've done is I'm going to project out over the next few years where we see the fund based on our current build-out plan for next gen and what we know about agencies who have declared their desire to replace their CPE equipment. So this is what it looks like in 2015, 2016. These are actual numbers for this slide. So at the end of 2016 fiscal year, our fund balance was about 53 million. So we carry that to the next year. We do not have these numbers finalized yet, so most of these are projections. And so that 102 million, so if you go down through the revenues, I should have that number in a couple of months, and I'll update that when I do. And that'll tell me my total resources available. My operational budget, that number's pretty solid, where it says state operations. Local assistance, that number is pretty good as well, because that's a big part of that is the CPE and other things that we know about, things that are not, they're fairly static because we know what equipment we've replaced over the last year. So we think by the end of this year, there'll be about 37 million left in the fund. So we carry that to the next year. And then you can see we're projecting a revenue decline based on the decline we've seen. All right. And then you'll notice that for next gen 911, we're starting to build out some of these ESI nets. I'll get that out. I'll get to that in a minute, which is why you see that number go up. The reason why you see local assistance go from 88 million to 96 million is because a large agency is going to be replacing their CPE, and so we have to account for that. And then the rest of the numbers are pretty consistent. There's not a lot of changes there. So that puts us at the end of June 2018. We would have about 3 million left in the fund. We carry that over the next year. And then these are the projections for the next year where we take another step forward in next gen, and we're looking at that year, July 2018 through June 2019 is when some action is going to be needed. And as Jill said, we're working on those corrective steps now. And keep in mind the 2016, 2017 numbers will probably change when we finally get the final number in from Department of Finance and BOE. All right, and you've got a copy of this in your handouts. So let's talk a little bit about next gen. So that's where we are now. You saw we're allocating some resources, both funds and personnel, to next gen. Well, why next gen? Well, one thing it's going to do is faster call delivery. We've heard again and again that's very important. We all realize that. It's going to increase our routing accuracy. Right now, the routing that we have in place is based on technology that was state-of-the-art in 1980, when I started high school. That was a while ago. It's also increased efficiency, and it increases the routing and call overflow and backup. So if you think about an ESI net, it's an IP network. Right now, you've got an alt-answer switch in your back room. Someone else has a similar one in their back room. You have a problem, you call them. Hey, are you ready? Yep, I'm ready. You flip their switch, they flip theirs. The calls go. In an ESI net, anyone that's connected on that ESI net can take your calls. And it can be done dynamically. You could even dynamically allocate those calls. For an agency like CHP or CAL FIRE or some of the larger agencies that have multiple centers, you can come up with your own metric to route calls from one center to the next, to plus up during busy times and do your own staffing and backup capabilities. So this is a huge function, and it's a big paradigm shift for the PSAP community. It also provides us with updated GIS, or graphical information system. So this is the mapping layers and all that detail that's in there. We'll be prepared for wireless location data. So today, when a 911 call comes in, about 40% of the calls come in. I can't remember the stats, 40 or 60%. In phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 means I only know the sector of the cell tower that you're coming in on. So you take that pie-shaped area, and I know you're somewhere in that pie-shaped area, which if you figure it goes out like this, and it could be several miles long. And I only know you're somewhere in that rough area. That's phase 1. Phase 2 means that I can use, each carrier does a little different, but I can get increased location accuracy. I may not know exactly where you are, but it's better because I'm able to know where within that pie shape you are. So when we are finally getting location data sent to us from your device, we need to have a network to be able to receive that. So even if the phone did that today, down at the chipset level, which is what we need, we don't have a network to receive it. So we want to be positioned to be prepared for when that happens. And then other newer technologies. And the bottom one is important. The networks are aging. We know that they want to move toward an IP environment. If we are not proactive in rolling out next gen, we will no longer be in the driver's seat. We want to be in the driver's seat and design the network, the next gen network that works best for California. And so that's an important takeaway. So we're staying active in the next gen 911 deployment. So essentially, if you look at back at this basic call routing, what next gen does is it drops down in on top of that legacy system an IP-based network that we can use to route our calls. So it will eventually replace the selective router, the alley database, all those things are replaced, and we connect in directly with the carrier. So your call would go to the carrier, to our ESI net, and then we would route the call to the correct PSAP over that ESI net. We're in the process of developing a next-gen transition or implementation. With your permission, I'd like to brief that out at the next board meeting. Our report will be final at the end of June. I'll distribute that to the board members, put it up on our website. However, right now, what it's looking like is there'll be an ESI net prime, and then there'll be some regional ESI nets. Other states have built out one ESI net for their whole state. They don't have 28.5 million calls a year. So we think that would be unwise to put all of us on one ESI net for the entire state. So the purpose of this prime ESI net would be to give us system monitoring capability for the entire network. It would also be able to interface with all the other ESI nets that are out there. We can also move the alley database services into that and all the other call monitoring functions and everything that we have. So it would give us a central location. And we have some design considerations for that I'll talk about next time. And then these regional ESI nets, we're looking at aligning them with the natural geographic boundaries and call routing capabilities of the PSAPs today. This is our draft model of this. So you see the prime, and then you see a region up north, and you see a total on the side there of the regions that we've got planned now. So our plan is to take this transition plan and do an outreach with all the PSAPs and all the agencies that are affected to make sure what we're thinking meets their operational need. All right, so that's the next step in the process. And the plan will be completed in June of 30th, so at the end of this week. Regional ESI nets are already being built out. So we've taken a look, as I discussed the last time in front of the advisory board. The Northeast project has been awarded to ROI and Synergem. There's 36 PSAPs involved in that. We're starting with just 2 carriers to begin with, and then that may grow from there. And the Pasadena Ring project is 8 PSAPs down in the Pasadena area that'll have an ESI net there. I'm going to be holding discussions with the PSAPs in the month of July. And then we want to have vendor discussions in August. So the idea is, here's the implementation plan. We think this is what's going to work. Vet it through the PSAP community to make sure we aren't missing anything. And then have discussions with the vendors to make sure they can support it. And those vendor discussions will be with one vendor at a time, so they're free to share without giving away secrets and everything else. And that's kind of the format of it. So our outreach meeting schedule you see on the next slide. We've got one in July 14th in the Bay Area, July 18th in Sacramento, July 21st up in Redding. We're trying to add one, July 21st down in San Luis Obispo area. So more word to come on that. And then the 25th will be in Los Angeles, the 26th in Inland, and we think we're going to add one more for the San Diego region. That's another request we've had. So this, of course, is happening on top of all the FirstNet outreach. So it's an interesting schedule. So this, if you need more information on this, feel free to contact the 911 branch. And like I said, the next time we meet in September, I'll have a lot more detail on this to brief out to you on what this looks like for California. So with that, questions?
Budge, is this presentation going to be part of the of what you're presenting at these various meetings? I thought this was really well done and explains both the current network and where we're going with next gen and the cost factors involved.
Yeah, we can definitely do that for those outreach meetings, absolutely. And then there'll be a lot more detail. Those meetings we've scheduled for two to 3 hours, depending on the location. So we'll have the time to go through this and do a Q&A. Yeah, and I'll definitely include the beginning part of this.
No, very comprehensive and well done. The other question I have is in terms of cost for next gen. When I looked at the fiscal 17-18, it was 10 million. Then it goes up to 25 million in 18-19. Is there any projected cost total for next gen implementation in California? I've heard a lot of numbers out there, and nothing really definitive on the cost. Anywhere from 300 million to 800 million is the range that I've heard.
So our we're currently working on a rough order of magnitude cost. The most recent version we have is about 3 years old. That number was 400 million, but it included a replacement of all call handling equipment in that calculation. That's not the path we're going to take. What we're going to do is bring ESINet all the way up to the PSAP. If they've got an I3 compliant, next-gen ready call answering solution, we'll plug in. If they don't, we'll put a gateway. That way we don't have to do this forklift upgrade on CPE. That'll dramatically reduce cost. So that number is going to change. I'll have the final number by the 30th of June. We're working on it this week, and we're doing back and forth and looking at the numbers. But it will be lower than the 400 million number that was put before this board before.
I have a question. Looking at all the, there's a lot of talk about consolidation and regionalization of the PSAPs, and there's a certain amount of duplication with equipment, certainly, that the CETNA pays out. Have we looked at opportunities as we move into our next gen to provide incentives maybe for some of that?
We have, and so in our operations manual, this last round of call answering equipment, we included in the solicitation a hosted solution. So that would be the opportunity for multiple PSAPs to come together and say, okay, we're going to house the call answering equipment in 2 different dispatch centers, but 10 of us will share it. And so that model is included in our most recent operations manual update that we're pushing out. So that's one way that we see to kind of leverage that, shared equipment model. The ESINet has the capability to share other services across it, but based on our government code and the way it is, I can't fund a shared network for CAD or RMS or radio or based on government code. So we have to take a really close look at that and what it means. So the way that I want to address this is let's take the first step. Let's get this ESINet in. Let's get it functioning. Let's get our arms around what the costs are. Let's get it working. Let's understand the technology that's available. Then we can possibly take the next step to see how that network can be shared for other services. And that's how I'm looking at it. Too much change at the same time is generally a bad idea. So we're trying to keep the same paradigm that exists today for 911. The 911 branch is responsible to make sure the call goes to the right PSAP. The PSAP answers the call. So we're trying to keep in that paradigm as we move through next gen, and then look for ways to grow from there once it's in place and functional.
Budge, have you developed a high-level timeline as far as what that transition time frame looks like?
So if you think about next gen, there's really 4 things that need to be in place. So you could kind of think of them as 4 puzzle pieces that need to come together to make next gen. One of them is the technology. It's pretty well defined today, right? We know that. The other one is the collaboration to make sure that you've got the governance structure, the regional structure, and the operational conversations to make sure that your technology meets those needs. That's the other piece. Then you've got to have some kind of funding mechanism to fund the whole thing. There's that piece. And the final one is the procurement vehicle to do it all. So once I get all those in place, I'll have a much better feel for that timeline. Now, if I had them today in place and we had the staff to build this out, you could do the whole thing in 2 to 3 years. You really could. But you've got to get all those pieces of the puzzle together. So that's what I've been working really hard on. So this collaboration and governance piece and the technology piece, that's really what I'm focusing on through the summer and into, September, October timeframe. I have a procurement vehicle now, but it doesn't allow me to transition the services from one contract vehicle to the next. And it runs out in 6 years. So if I build the next gen 911 system, in 6 years I need to go back out to bid again. And that kind of scares me, to have a working, rock-solid IP next-gen 911 network with no way to transition it. So we're talking with the Department of Technology on what that would look like for 911. And then Jill talked about the funding piece. That's the other piece. So we've got what we need to take these first steps. So I'm going to go as far as I can until all the pieces of that puzzle come together.
I don't want to go too far down this, but are you in a position where you can speak briefly about what efforts are being made to ultimately deal with the pending deficit in the Setna? What are we doing to fix the deficit? You said that's where the focus is.
We're trying to, as Bud said, we're trying to find areas where we can cut or reduce fees that are already existing. That's the short-term goal, but the long-term goal is going to need to be legislation. So we're trying to, save our pennies where we can, and we do think there's some efficiencies we've identified that may be tough to get, but I think we can get there. And then, on a parallel path, we're going to have to pursue a total revamp legislatively.
And I guess that was the question that's where I was ultimately going. So where are we at with that? What's the effort on that? Is that something that's coming up in the next term?
Well, because it will be perceived or is legally a tax, we have to go at the right moment when, but I believe that all the legislature and the governor will support anything that has to do with 911 and public safety. So I think it's an easier sell, but we have to really know what it is we want and fine tune it. So we have to get our house in order, if you will. We have to figure out what we can cut and what we can make it as it currently exists, and then explain and educate how even with those efficiencies, ultimately we're looking at bigger and bigger deficits every year, just based on the way it's currently structured. So it's going to take some lifting from our legislative and external affairs folks to educate so that when the bill does come out, that everyone understands what it is we're trying to do. So we have a little bit more work to do in-house, I would say, to find out what roadblocks there are as far as, for instance, reducing the tariffs. We pay these exorbitant tariffs. And one of you mentioned the cost of the database. Did that go down? So we're exploring those things first.
I think Mr. Salvador might be able to shed some additional light on this.
Good morning again. There continue to be ongoing discussions between the administration, the legislature, OES, on timing, on everything that has to deal with, as Jill said, you're looking at a total package. You see there's a common denominator to all this relative to industry, relative to public safety, relative to the different branches of government. There's also the regulatory function as well on the part of the tariffs. So there is a matter of timing and political will when all of those things can be set up such that it's an easy push for everyone, knowing that there may be some some tidal waves that will occur because of the revamp that needs to occur based upon the amount of funding that's at stake here. So once all of that stuff, there's going to be a lot of noise. Again, this is one of the things that we've talked about relative to not just the 911 system, but the ongoing industry efforts of telecom as a whole, of where we're going with both voice and data, everything else in between. You got your next gen 911, you got cyber security issues, you got all these other things that are going on that all have to be set in place and make sure that once we make that move, we make it right, and everybody is on board with the move that is going to get made.
Any other questions regarding this, this agenda item? Okay, next item up is a 911 branch report, again by Mr. Courier.
Oh, I guess I'm back at it. Okay, so, I got it, Paul. Yep. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Text to 911, our wireless technical routing analysis project, wireless deployment, an update on contracts, and the branch operations manual. So this first slide here is our current Text to 911 deployment. And you can see that, for me, the big takeaway is down there. 266 of the 441 PSAPs are actively on the path to deploy Text to 911. We're working on setting up a more definitive timeline for this and try and set some milestones and dates to get the remaining of those PSAPs on this path. So we would encourage, your outreach and support for that. We have, on my team, we have several folks. They can contact their 911 advisor. They can contact Sharice Bartlett, who's been actively engaged with all these PSAPs for Text to 911. So we want to keep this moving forward. This is one of our top priorities. The next slide talks about the Wireless Technical Routing Analysis Project, or WTRAP. I'm not sure how you say that acronym, but so the big takeaway here is if you look across the bottom of the slide, this is the results of the first quarter. So this is taking a look at every single cell sector based on the statutory requirement for us to do this. We looked at 70,000 sectors, and of those 70,000, a little over 10%, or 7,900, were rerouted. And the other categories to the right of that show you how those reroutes happened. They either got rerouted from a PSAP to CHP, or from a PSAP to another PSAP, from CHP to a PSAP, or from one CHP to another CHP where you had overlap there. So this is an ongoing effort. So that's why that last agenda item we discussed. This will be an ongoing report that we have available each time we meet. We'll have an update for the previous quarter and the status of that. So you'll see this in your slide deck each and every time. When we get to the end of the year, we'll start right back over and do it all again. And
Bunch, if I may, I would like to recognize your staff and thank them for the hard work they've done with this, because I look at the number of counties we got done in the first quarter, a tremendous lift. And I think as we see those PSAP movement happening, we're ultimately making calls much better for the public when they call, because it goes to the right PSAP the first time. So I think it's important to acknowledge your staff. I know my staff appreciates all their help. I need to acknowledge my staff too. And then also the county coordinators, because they've played a huge role in this. And I think it's the team working together that actually gets success. And I think when we look at the number of sectors that we've moved, all directions, I think ultimately we're accomplishing the goal we set out to with this regular process. So, just looking at the stats from first quarter, I'm excited to see the movement we're making and the work's paying off.
It is, and we're getting a good response from the carriers as well, so we thank them for actually, once we identify a reroute needs to be made, they're doing it, which helps in the process. So the idea of doing it once a year is that gives you enough time after the reroute has happened to track the data. So when you come back around the next year, you've got call volume to determine statistics to figure out if those sectors are being routed to the right place. And so this will be an ongoing process.
Budge, a request if it's not part of the next couple of slides here, but as we look at these numbers, could we also see the percentage of calls, wireless calls, that are going to local PSAPs versus CHP
you know, as these changes are implemented? Because I would think that perhaps with so many sectors being diverted to local PSAPs, that the number of calls going to local PSAPs should go up, but I know that hasn't been the case the last few years, so I'd be interested to kind of keep tabs on that.
Okay.
that's-
Yeah, our goal is obviously to send the call to the right PSAP,
I
regardless of
understand,
the stat. But we can track that for you, you know? We want it to go to the right place, and that's what we're focused on. Whatever the numbers are, the numbers are. But we can get you that number. We certainly know that the old paradigm from 6 years ago, where everybody thought every wireless call went to CHP, those days are gone. Where, you know, our focus is to route every call to the correct PSAP.
And I imagine we are not gonna see a major increase in number of calls, because ultimately they end up with the calls. If they're there, we just transfer it, and so we're taking the transfer out. Ultimately, there'll probably be a few missed dials and a few duplicates that may not make it, but the majority of calls end up being transferred, so there shouldn't be an increase or a significant increase in number of calls they receive.
And to clarify, I think I meant that, the initial call. Yeah.
Okay,
Because I
gotcha.
hear you,
Yeah.
exactly. The calls now are ending up in the right place. It's just, so maybe a better thing to look at would be the
Number of transfers.
Maybe that
Yeah.
would be a good report to look at, or a good, if that's something that you could easily provide.
Okay.
But to see if the number of.
All right, we'll look at providing something like that. We'll see what that might look like. Okay. So the next slide is on wireless deployment. So there are a few holdouts. Atherton Police Department is not accepting wireless calls still. We have a plan to address that. Oakland is going to be fully deployed. It was a result of this wireless project, really, that helped them move in that direction. So we're continuing to work with them. SAC PD, there's some work yet to do there. Good news on this one, Stanislaus Regional has fully implemented, so that's a good news. So from this slide, we basically have two agencies that we need to reach out to, SAC PD and Atherton PD. And so my goal is by next board to get this slide blank. We'll see if that happens, right? I know this slide's been up there for a while. Contracts, just a little update on the contracts. We're in the process of selecting another vendor for the foreign language contract. We did extend the current contract through September in order to give us time to get the new person on board, the new vendor on board. The next gen transition planning, as I've already discussed, we'll have a final report in the end of June. I'll send that out to everybody. I'll post it on the website. There's nothing secret in there, and I would appreciate feedback on that. The next gen 911 IFB, I mentioned that. ROI Networks has been awarded the Northeast, and AT&T is an intent to award. We're pretty close to having that signed as well. The CPE contract is the other big one. We do have that in place now with 9 different vendors. So that's sometimes one vendor with 2 different CPE manufacturers that they're providing, but there is 9 different choices on it. Chapter 3 of the operations manual is currently being updated. It's going to support this new CPE contract and the new funding. We're going to add the hosted solution as I've discussed it. We're going to refine some of the incremental cost, and we're going to look at supporting text to 911 deployment and providing some, when you submit CPE, just submit with it your text to 911 deployment schedule. So those are some of the big ticket items in Chapter 3 of the operations manual. We've been working with the LRPC to take a look at this and help us with these changes. And we're going to post this as soon as we can because there are PSAPs out there ready to procure, and we need this chapter in place so that they know their funding model that they're working toward. And that's it for me, unless you have any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Courier? Okay, on to agenda item number 9, the Long Range Planning Committee report from Mr. Cullen.
Thank you, Pat. And the Long Range Planning Committee met yesterday morning, and we have a set agenda. The first topic of discussion was PSAP regionalization, and there's been a lot of discussion both at the LRPC and at this body about PSAP regionalization. One of the interesting things that came up, Budge mentioned that there are no case studies out there indicating that physical consolidation results in a cost savings, even when you amortize the costs over a long period of time. Now, that may be partially due to the fact that there haven't been any long-term studies of what physical consolidation does, and if there really is a cost savings. We believe that virtual consolidation is certainly does help with cost savings if you're sharing technology, which a next-gen environment will allow you to do. You're sharing the costs with other agencies. It leads to some other ancillary benefits like redundancy, so that if there's a problem with your center, or you have to, for some reason, evacuate your center, you could go to another center on the ESInet and still be able to provide 911 services to your community. Better technology, better bang for your buck with a virtual consolidation. If you combine your funding with other agencies, you can certainly get better technology. You still retain your local autonomy, which I think is one of the factors that have agencies reticent to do a physical consolidation, because you lose the autonomy over your people in your jurisdiction in your 911 center. A virtual consolidation still allows you to maintain that. There is the possibility of staff savings in terms of overtime and other staffing costs. If you think about it, if you're sharing the same CPE system and possibly CAD and radio, and you have people that call in sick or aren't there, and your other agencies are in full staffing, you may not have to call in overtime. And there may be other synergies there where you can share staffing costs with those other agencies. We are currently in northern Santa Clara County, have a model that we are using where we have purchased a CAD system between 3 cities. We are operating it over a network. We're about to install a CPE, a hosted solution for all 3 cities, and we'll be on the same radio system. So we think that we're getting better technology. We have built-in redundancy, and we're looking at some possible staff savings in the near future once we get all 3 of these systems up and running. So while there's a lot of discussion and controversy about physical consolidation, technology is going to provide us the opportunity to do virtual consolidation, which I think will save PSAPs and hopefully the state some money going forward. That was the gist of our discussion about regionalization. And the second major topic that we discussed were the proposed changes to the 911 operations manual. And I should clarify that as this is the state's operations manual, these changes don't require approval or approval by this body, by the advisory board, but they do want to run it through this body so that we can take a look at it and see if there's anything that either we thought was onerous or punitive, and just to make sure that the changes were in line with what the 911 Advisory Board felt we should be doing going forward. There are really two, the major change there is involves residual funding, and furniture would no longer be an item that would be eligible for residual funding. And that may be an impact on some of the PSAPs. There is particularly the smaller ones who don't have general fund money to pay for expensive workstations, and those workstations can be in the neighborhood of $20,000 a piece, so that is a considerable expense. It's not directly related to 911 call taking, and I think that the 911 office felt that that was not an appropriate item to have as part of the residual funding. There is another a list of all the remaining ancillary equipment that is eligible for funding, things like a digital recorder, which are fairly expensive. There is a clause in that portion of the operations manual that says that only 25% of the total allocation can be used towards ancillary items. That's still a pretty significant amount of funding if you think about it. There's a couple of exceptions in there, but we really would like feedback from the PSAPs and this group about that. The state would like to roll this out very quickly, as Budge indicated, because we are coming up to a new funding cycle. So any comments or proposed changes should be back to Alicia Fuller at the State 911 office by July 15th, so that they can publish the revisions to the manual in a timely manner and move forward with CPE funding. The final issue was wireless routing, and Budge now has this as part of a report to the full 911 advisory board, so we're going to probably drop that as a continuing discussion point. That program is obviously working very well, and some of the changes that have gone into effect They're moving this forward very quickly with both the CHP, the county coordinators, and the state office. I think are doing a great job of looking at all the sectors and getting them changed in a timely manner. The carriers are now making those changes a lot faster than they were in the past, so we're seeing the benefits of that program on an ongoing basis. And those are the major issues that we discussed at the LRPC. If my colleagues wanted to add anything else that I forgot, please feel free to go forward now. Paul, you think we covered it all, or?
No, I think you did a good job. I think you really summarized everything we discussed yesterday.
So any questions from the board about those discussion points or where we are going forward?
Charlie, do we need to finish up on the white paper?
I believe we do. I think we do need
Recommendation.
to, Pat was, I think, is going to put that to a vote. We didn't see any comments that I was aware of on that draft of the white paper, and I would like to acknowledge the effort that Chuck and the working group did in putting that paper together. It took a lot of time and effort. It covers a lot of different topics in there, but it's very well done, and it is a great discussion point and a jumping off point when you look at consolidation and other issues that are going on in the PSAP community.
Okay, and with regard to the white paper, again, you know, at the April 6th meeting, we did ask for feedback. We did not receive any kind of a response. Unfortunately, in this instance, we did not agendize this for a vote, so we cannot vote on it today, but we will agendize it for a vote at the September 28th meeting.
Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge him as well. I thought it was very well done, and I think it captures all the subtleties of what it's going to take if someone does want to do that. It'll be a very good guidance document for anybody to review. I was wondering, where is it going to be housed? Or how will it be distributed once it's, where is it going to go?
Bud, you want to address this?
I don't know if it's working. All right. So what we're going to do with that document, once it gets approved, is we'll put it on the operation or on the 911 website, and we'll maintain it. So, and we also have identified Andrew Matson, who's here in the group, as the kind of the point of contact on my team. If anyone is looking at taking steps in this direction, we want to have someone for you to work with, and then he'll link you up with other PSAPs that have done this. And walk you through the document and guide you through it as kind of a discussion process. So that's where we're going to eventually end up having this. It may be an appendix to the operations manual, but it's something we want to make readily available. For anyone who wants to see it now, it is in the meeting minutes from the previous meeting, and so it is available online now in draft form, even though it hasn't been approved. So if there's anyone who's interested in reading through it that may not have been here or know, it is available online right now. Once it's ratified in September, we'll put it on our website and we'll maintain the document.
Okay, any further discussion regarding agenda item number 9? Next item up is the County Coordinator Task Force, report by Tracy Kessler.
Good morning. The County Coordinator Task Force continues to mentor and support new and existing county coordinators. And we also are assisting and facilitating the text to 911 with our respective counties. We hold monthly county coordinator calls, and during a couple of the calls, we had some issues come up that we helped facilitate a better process. So one of them was an issue was brought up that the major carriers have been having a hard time verifying law enforcement and getting exigent information, which includes location information and subscriber information, to law enforcement to help with the safety of citizens. They're having a hard time because repo companies and bounty hunters and private citizens are learning the process, calling the wireless carriers and getting private citizen location information and subscriber information. So each carrier is putting in different processes and making it hard to get the information. So the task force facilitated a meeting with all the major carriers, CHP, Cal OES, and the CCTF. We've come up with a process that we believe will streamline So all the carriers are asking for the same thing, verifying the same information. It will be piloted with CHP, and once the pilot goes through, we see if there's any bugs that we need to work out. That will be the process for all of California, and it'll help with getting that information that we need. So another thing that we facilitated was...
Tracy, real quick, what's the
Yes.
timeline on that? Or do you guys know?
I don't know.
Okay.
So I guess it's going to be a few months, CHP. So another issue that came up, there's a program out there that's called New Star, and they have the Number Portability Administration Center where they keep all the phone numbers for wireless carriers. Because of number portability, you don't really know where a phone belongs, so you can't ask for subscriber information and that sort of thing without finding that. A new company got the contract, took it over, and put out some information, but it was very confusing. So the task force facilitated a meeting with the new company, which is called iConnective, and streamline the process for that also. They wanted to have everybody have a login, name and password, so we were able to get one login and password per agency, which will streamline the process, and that's in place. That's all I have, unless you have questions.
Okay, I just noticed something on the posted agenda as it relates to agenda item number regarding the long-range planning committee report on the white paper on regionalization. It is scheduled for a discussion and vote, so we can take a vote. So with that, is there a motion to approve the white paper on regionalization?
I make a motion to approve the white paper.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Paul, please call a roll.
Chief Scott Howland,
Aye.
Charles Burdan,
Aye.
Chief John Peters,
Aye.
Chief Craig Carter,
Aye.
Sheriff Corey Hornia,
Aye.
Chris Herron,
Aye.
Michael Miller,
Aye.
Charles Cullen,
Aye.
Paul Truxell.
Aye.
Motion carries. I apologize for that oversight. Just happened to look back at the agenda. Okay, with that, thank you, Ms. Getzler, for your comments. Next item up is agenda items for the next meeting. Since we've taken care of the white paper, are there any other items that the board would like to see on the next agenda?
Can we get a standing update on the funding process and how we move forward with that, being it's coming to a critical end here? I think it should be on the agenda from this point until we have a resolve.
Certainly. We'll do that. Any other requests for agenda items? Paul, do we have any requests for public comment?
Yes, we do.
If we can get the implementation plan, I'll provide an update of what I learned from the PSAPs and from the vendor community, and I can report that out on Next Gen 911 implementation. I'll give a little mini summary of that, if that's all right. Okay.
Any other public comment, Paul?
Yeah, we also want to talk about inviting SAC PD and Atherton PD to the board to discuss their wireless deployment schedule.
Okay. Okay, with that being said, we will stand adjourned. Our next meeting is September 28th. Location and time to be verified. Thank you all.